Saving Home. Chapter 10. The surgical suite was a different kind of cold than the winter air outside or the icy stare of a paparazzo. It was a controlled, pressurized chill designed to keep bacteria at bay and sweat off a surgeon's brow. Kate stood over the open chest cavity of a 24-year-old bicycle courier who had met the grill of a delivery truck. The resident across from her, a nervous second-year named Evans, was vibrating with enough kinetic energy to power the lights. Suction, Kate ordered, her voice muffled by the mask but carrying absolute authority. You're pooling, Evans. If I can't see the bleed, I can't clamp it. Sorry, Dr. McCormick. It's just, there's a lot of blood. Yes, that tends to happen when the thoracic aorta is nicked. Focus. She didn't think about the camera flashes outside. She didn't think about Joe sitting in a clubhouse 3 miles away. Her world had narrowed to a 4-inch incision and the rhythmic, erratic beat of a heart fighting to stop. Clamp, she said, extending her hand without looking away. The scrub nurse slapped the instrument into her palm. With a singular, fluid motion, she navigated the vascular jungle and clamped the bleeder. The field cleared. The vitals monitor, which had been screaming a jagged, panic-inducing alarm, settled into a steady, albeit fast, rhythm. Evans exhaled loudly. Nice catch. We aren't playing baseball, Evans, she snapped, the analogy stinging her more than him. We are repairing a human being. Suture. 4-0 Proline. It took another 2 hours to close. By the time Kate stripped off her gloves and gown, her neck was stiff, but her mind was crystal clear. This was the work. This was the truth. Everything else was noise. She exited the scrub room, expecting to head to the recovery ward. Instead, Thorne was waiting for her in the hallway. He wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a woman in a sharp gray suit, Margaret Sterling, the hospital's director of public relations, and a man Kate recognized as board chairman Stuart Underwood. Dr. McCormick, Underwood said, his tone carrying the weight of a man who worried about endowments and liability insurance. We need a moment. My patient is in post-op, Kate said, not breaking stride. I need to brief the family. Another attending is handling the family, Sterling cut in, stepping into Kate's path. We have a situation in the lobby that needs to be addressed. Now. Kate stopped. She looked at Thorne. He gave a nearly imperceptible shrug, signaling that this was above his pay grade. We can use my office, Thorne muttered. The office was small, cluttered with medical journals, and smelled of stale coffee. Chairman Underwood sat on the edge of the desk. Sterling remained standing, clutching a tablet like a shield. Use of the ambulance bay as a stage for personal drama is unacceptable, Dr. McCormick, Underwood began, skipping the pleasantries. I agree, Kate reasoned, leaning against the closed door. That's why I cleared it. You're welcome. You threaten major media outlets with litigation, Sterling said, tapping her screen. The video is already circulating. You come off as aggressive. I come off as a doctor protecting her workspace, Kate countered. Would you prefer I let them impede a cardiac transport? We prefer our staff not to be the lead story on TMZ, Chairman Underwood said. The board is concerned about the hospital's reputation. We are a research institution, not a backdrop for sports romance. We have donors calling, asking if the ER is compromised. Is that what this is? Kate felt the heat rising in her neck, but she forced it down, channeling the same ice she used in the OR. You're worried about donors? We are worried about the perception of competence, Sterling said smoothly. When the chief of trauma is making headlines for dating a baseball player, it suggests a lack of focus. Kate laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Focus? I just repaired a thoracic aortic dissection on a moving target. My mortality rate is the lowest in the district. My department runs at 98% efficiency under budget. My competence is a matter of statistical record, Miss Sterling, not public perception. She pushed off the door and walked toward Underwood. You want to talk about reputation? Fine. Let's talk about it. If you suspend me, or hide me, or ask me to issue some apologize for existing statement, you validate the narrative that my personal life impacts my professional capability. You tell every donor and every patient that a woman cannot be both a surgeon and a human being. Galloway frowned, crossing his arms. We aren't suggesting suspension. We're suggesting that you take a leave of absence until the heat dies down. No. The word hung in the air. Excuse me? Sterling blinked. I said no. If I leave, I look guilty. I look like a distraction. I am staying right here. I will work my shifts. I will use the back entrance if I have to, but I will not hide. Kate turned to Thorne. Chief, do you have concerns about my surgical ability? Thorne looked at Chairman Underwood, then at Kate. He cleared his throat. McCormick is the best hands I have. Whatever circus is outside, she leaves it at the scrub sink. I saw her handle the press today. She didn't play to the cameras. She cited the legal code for patient safety. That's not a distraction. That's leadership. Kate held Underwood's gaze. You want to protect the hospital's brand? Then let me do my job. The story dies when I become boring. If I'm just a doctor going to work, the cameras will leave. If I'm a scandal in hiding, they stay. Underwood studied her for a long, tense minute. He looked at Sterling, who looked unhappy but resigned. Fine, Underwood grunted. But if one reporter gets onto the surgical floor, or if your association impacts patient care metrics by a fraction of a percentage point, we revisit this conversation. Understood. Kate nodded sharply. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have charts to update. She walked out of the office, her heart hammering harder than it had during the surgery. She had won the battle for her job, but as she walked down the corridor, checking her phone, she saw the time. 7:05 p.m. First pitch. She had fought for her identity. Now Joe was out there fighting for his. The clubhouse at Riverside Park was usually a sanctuary of noise. Bad hip-hop, cracking sunflower seeds, and the distinct smack of balls hitting leather. Tonight, it felt like a wake. Joe sat at his locker, staring at his phone. I'm at the hospital. The ambulance bay is clear. I did it my way. The text had arrived 2 hours ago. He had read it 100 times. I did it my way. It sounded like a victory, but to Joe, it felt like a door slamming shut. He had tried to mobilize the troops, to set up a perimeter, to control the damage. He had treated the situation like a wild pitch, something to block, smother, and secure. And she had rejected the protection. Cap, you good? It was rookie pitcher Mendez. He looked terrified to even address Joe. Joe looked up, forcing the mask of the wall onto his face. It felt heavy today. I'm good, Mendez. You ready for Philadelphia? Jackson's gonna be hunting fastballs early. Yeah, I got it. Low and away. Let's go. Joe strapped on his shin guards, the familiar click of the buckles, usually bringing a sense of invincibility. Today, they just felt like plastic. As he walked through the tunnel toward the dugout, the roar of the crowd washed over him. Usually, he fed off it. Tonight, it grated. He popped out of the dugout and jogged to home plate. The applause was there, loud and loyal, but there was an undercurrent. A murmur. He could see people in the front rows holding up their phones, zooming in not on his swing, but on his face, looking for the cracks. Is he distracted? Is the girlfriend ruining him? The first 3 innings were a grind. Mendez didn't have his best stuff, and Joe had to work twice as hard to frame pitches, stealing strikes on the corners. His mind felt split. Half of him was calculating spin rates and batter tendencies. The other half was back at the Watergate, seeing the fear in Kate's eyes that she tried so hard to hide. He had tried to own her narrative. We issue a statement. We claim it. He thought he was being strong. Now, squatting behind the plate in the humidity of a D.C. summer, he wondered if he had just been arrogant. Top of the 6th. Tie game. 2-2. Runner on second. 2 outs. Gary Olson at the plate. Specific situation. High leverage. This was where Joe made his money. This was where he became the computer, the general. He signaled for a slider, down and in. Mendez shook him off. Joe called for the high fastball, changed the eye level. Mendez nodded. The windup. The pitch. It wasn't high. It wasn't a slider. It was a cross-up, a 96 miles per hour cutter that broke sharply toward Joe's unpadded wrist. In a normal headspace, Joe's reaction time was elite. He would have shifted, dropped the knee, taken the bruise to keep the ball in front. But for a fraction of a second, his mind was on the text. I did it my way. He was slow. The ball clipped the edge of his mitt, ricocheted off his forearm, and skittered toward the backstop. Passed ball, the umpire shouted. The runner from second rounded third. Joe scrambled, his movements frantic, uncoordinated. He grabbed the ball near the brick wall, spun, and threw to the plate-covering pitcher. The throw swam. It was wide. The runner slid in safe. 3-2 Philadelphia. The crowd groaned, a collective, dissatisfied sound that hit Joe in the gut harder than the ball had. Joe stood at the plate, mask in hand, staring at the scoreboard. E2. Error on the catcher. He walked to the mound to calm Mendez down, but he knew the truth. It wasn't Mendez's fault. The pitcher had missed his spot, sure, but Joe Russell didn't let balls by. Joe Russell was the wall. My bad, Joe muttered, handing Mendez the ball. Reset. Get the batter. They got out of the inning, but the damage was done. The rest of the game was a blur. Joe struck out in the 7th, swinging wildly at a curveball in the dirt. The distraction narrative was writing itself in real time. He could practically hear the sports talk radio hosts queuing up their hot takes for the morning commute. Russell's head isn't in the game. He's too busy playing bodyguard to his new lady. When the final out was recorded, Joe didn't linger on the field. He marched straight down the tunnel, ripping the Velcro of his batting gloves apart with savage force. He sat in front of his locker, head in his hands. Chet Baker, the manager, walked by. He stopped, rested a hand on Joe's shoulder for a fleeting second. "Shake it off, Cap. We got him tomorrow." But Joe knew he couldn't shake it off. Not like this. He looked at his phone again. No new texts. He closed his eyes and replayed the conversation in her apartment. "You want to issue a press release about my personal life? I'm talking about protecting you. My safety is not the issue. My autonomy is." The realization hit him with more force than the foul tip that had bruised his ribs in the 4th inning. He had been trying to protect her by pulling her into his world, by covering her with his fame, his PR team, and his strategies. He thought the joint statement was a shield. It wasn't a shield. It was a cage. Kate didn't need him to define her. She didn't need him to validate her existence to the press. By trying to control the story, he was implicitly agreeing that she was the story, a subplot in the season of Joe. She had cleared the ambulance ramp by citing the law. She had used her authority and her identity. She needed him to guard the plate, yes, but she wasn't the ball he had to catch. She was the pitcher. She was the one in control of her own game. Joe stood up. The media scrum was already forming in the center of the room. Usually, after a loss like this, especially with a personal error, he would hide in the trainer's room or give generic non-answers until they went away. Not tonight. He grabbed a fresh jersey, pulled it on, and grabbed his cap. He walked straight toward the media huddle. "Joe! Joe! Over here, Joe! Can we talk about the pass ball in the 6th? Joe! Thoughts on the reports about Dr. McCormick?" He stopped in front of the backdrop with the team logos. He adjusted the microphone. He looked calm. The frantic energy from the apartment was gone. The distraction from the field had solidified into a new, quiet resolve. "Let's go," he said. "I've got time." A reporter from the Post, an older guy named Reynolds who had covered Joe for years, took the lead. "Joe, tough loss. That ball in the 6th seemed like you got crossed up. Was distraction a factor tonight?" It was the softball question, leading to the hard truth. Reynolds was giving him an out, or a trap. Joe leaned into the mic. "No excuses. I missed the block. Mendez threw a hard cutter. I was set up for the seams. I reacted late. That's on me. My focus needs to be better between the lines." Speaking of focus, a guy from a cable network chimed in, more aggressive. "Pictures surfaced today of you and a woman identified as Dr. Catherine McCormick. There's a lot of noise out there. People are saying the media circus is affecting your play. Is it true? Is the relationship a distraction?" The room went quiet. This was the soundbite they wanted. The confession. Or the denial. Joe looked explicitly at the camera lens, imagining Kate watching from her apartment, or maybe from the break room at GW. "Are you asking about Dr. McCormick?" Joe asked, his voice steady, respectful. "Yes. Your girlfriend, Dr. McCormick," Joe corrected, emphasizing the title, "is the chief of trauma surgery at George Washington Hospital. While I was missing a block in the 6th inning tonight, she was likely 6 hours into a shift, saving lives that other people gave up on." He saw the reporters blink. They weren't expecting a resume reading. "You asked if she's a distraction," Joe continued, his voice gaining an authoritative cadence. "The only thing distracting about Dr. McCormick is that she is the most dedicated professional I have ever met in my life. I play a game for a living. I catch a ball. If I mess up, we lose a run. If she messes up, people don't go home to their families." He paused, letting that sink in. He wasn't hiding her, but he wasn't claiming her as a trophy either. He was deferring to her. So to answer your question, no, she isn't a distraction. She's an anchor. Witnessing her work ethic, her precision, it challenges me to be better at my job. Tonight, I failed to meet that standard. That's my failure, not hers. "So you are confirming the relationship?" a tabloid writer shouted from the back. Joe offered a small, tight smile. It wasn't the smile of a man in love, but the smile of a captain protecting his team. "I'm confirming that if you're looking for a story about excellence in DC, you're at the wrong stadium. You should be looking at the work she does at GW. But I'd suggest you stay out of her ambulance bay because she has important work to do." He tapped the microphone. "That's it for tonight. Thanks." He stepped off the podium. The reporters were murmuring, checking their recorders. He hadn't given them the mushy "we're in love" quote. He hadn't given them the "she's my muse" quote. He had given them a boundary, drawn in the dirt with a catcher's mitt. He walked back to his locker, stripped off his uniform, and showered. The hot water felt like it was washing away the confusion of the last 48 hours. He dressed quickly. Jeans, t-shirt, boots. He checked his phone. One new text. From Kate. "I saw the interview." Joe stared at the bubbles. waiting for the follow-up. Had he overstepped again? Had he said too much? The bubbles danced for a long time. Then, anchor. I like that. Also, you were late on the cutter because you dropped your left knee too early. We can review the tape later. Joe let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. A laugh bubbled up in his chest, real, light, relieving. She was critiquing his mechanics. She was back. He typed back. On my way over. I'm bringing Thai food and ice packs. You better get extra peanuts. And hurry. I have an early shift. Joe grabbed his bag and headed for the exit. He had lost the game, but he had finally figured out how to play the position. He wasn't the star of this story anymore. And for the first time, he was perfectly fine with that.